Grand Assembly of the Galactic Research Council. The vast chamber of the Galactic Research Council hummed with anticipation, filled with the most brilliant minds across the known universe. 1,000 luminescent panels lined the domed ceiling, casting a gentle glow over the tiered seating rings. Each seat was occupied by representatives from various species, creatures of gas, silicon, and plasma, entities that had long since abandoned biological forms, and others so fragile that a slight environmental shift could reduce them to dust. But today's gathering was different. The usual debates on interstellar ethics or technological advancements were set aside. Today they had convened for one purpose: to determine which species had truly conquered the deadliest worlds in the galaxy. At the heart of the chamber, standing behind a curved podium, was Chief Xenobiologist Zaital. His scaled hands trembled as he adjusted the data crystals before him. This presentation would either cement his reputation as a revolutionary scientist or shatter centuries of established knowledge. The air crackled with anticipation as first speaker Lu Min, a being whose form shimmered between solid and gaseous states, floated forward in her gravity bubble. Her bioluminescent tendrils pulsed in rhythmic patterns, the equivalent of a deep breath among her kind. "Honored colleagues," she began, her voice resonating through the chamber. "We have gathered today to hear the findings of Chief Xenobiologist Zaital regarding the known species that have evolved in the most extreme conditions the galaxy has ever seen. For centuries, we have believed one species to be the undisputed champions of survival, the Drachnids." At the mention of the Drachnids, an eerie silence spread across the room. Even the most logical, emotionless beings in attendance seemed to pause in deep contemplation. Everyone knew of the Drachnids. They were the pinnacle of survival, the ultimate testament to evolution's ability to overcome adversity. Their homeworld, Drar, was a waking nightmare. The holographic display in the center of the chamber flickered, revealing Drar in all its terrifying glory, a swirling storm of death and destruction. "Drar," Zaital continued, his voice carefully measured, "is a planet where existence itself defies reason. Surface gravity is 3.2 times galactic standard, meaning that any ordinary species would be crushed within moments of arrival. The planet's atmosphere is laced with corrosive gases, capable of dissolving standard hull plating in minutes. And then there are the environmental extremes, temperatures that fluctuate between freezing and boiling within a single rotation." As the display zoomed in, the delegates could see acid storms sweeping across the landscape, molten rivers cutting through jagged mountains of obsidian, and bursts of lightning so powerful they could incinerate an entire settlement in an instant. And yet, despite all of this, Zaital gestured and the image shifted to display a Drachnid warrior, a towering multi-limbed colossus of armored exoskeleton and biological redundancy. The Drachnid ambassador, a being twice the height of most species present, clicked its mandibles in satisfaction. "The Drachnids have thrived in an environment where survival should have been impossible," Zaital admitted. "Their biology is beyond anything we have ever studied. Triple-layered exoskeletons, redundant organ systems, natural radiation shielding. Their physical endurance alone makes them nearly indestructible." The Drachnid ambassador spoke for the first time, his voice a deep, vibrating hum that resonated through the chamber. "You speak truth, Chief Xenobiologist," he rumbled. "For over 3,000 cycles, we have stood as proof that no world, no force, can conquer us. We are the apex survivors. There is no species that rivals us." A murmur rippled through the council. It was an unspoken fact, one that had remained undisputed for centuries. But Zaital wasn't finished. He took a slow breath. "That was what we believed," he said, letting the weight of his words settle in. "Until now." A sudden shift in the room. The murmurs turned to exclamations. The Drachnid ambassador tilted his massive head, a low growl emanating from deep within his chest. "Chief Zaital," first speaker Lu Min said, her tendrils flickering with intrigue, "you imply that our understanding is incorrect, that there exists another species, one more resilient, more adaptable, more dangerous than the Drachnids?" Zaital placed a new data crystal into the console. The chamber dimmed. A new planet appeared in the holographic display. Blue, green, swirling white clouds. Unlike Drar, it did not appear hostile at first glance, and yet Zeital knew the truth. "Colleagues," he said, his voice trembling with excitement and dread, "I present to you Earth." Silence, and then chaos. The discovery of humans. The chamber erupted into an uproar. Voices clashed as representatives from across the galaxy debated, questioned, and outright denied the implications of what they had just seen. Earth? A death world more extreme than Drar? It was unthinkable. Impossible. The Drachnid ambassador, his exoskeleton plates shifting in agitation, leaned forward. His mandibles clicked, a sign of barely restrained annoyance. "Chief Zeital," he growled, his voice deep and rumbling. "This must be an error. You claim that this Earth is more extreme than Drar? That these creatures you call humans are superior survivors to the Drachnids? I find that difficult to believe." Zeital anticipated this reaction. He had prepared for it. Carefully, he inserted another data crystal, activating the next phase of his presentation. The holographic projection shifted, zooming into Earth's surface, revealing vast oceans, dense jungles, towering mountain ranges, and sprawling deserts. It was a planet teeming with life, a stark contrast to the barren, storm-ravaged wastelands of Drar. "I understand your skepticism," Zeital began, "but allow me to present the evidence." With a flick of his fingers, the projection highlighted Earth's environmental hazards. Gravity, 1.2 times galactic standard, high enough to put significant strain on most skeletal structures. Atmosphere, high levels of corrosive oxygen, a gas that most species found toxic or even lethal. Climate extremes, from boiling deserts to frozen tundras, where temperatures varied wildly between seasons. Unstable geology. Earth was riddled with volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, hurricanes, and tsunamis. Predatory ecosystem. A staggering 80% of Earth's wildlife was considered dangerous to humans, from venomous insects to massive land-based carnivores. Microbial warfare. Unlike Drar, where survival depended on sheer toughness, humans evolved in a constant battle against microscopic threats. Bacteria, viruses, and pathogens so adaptive that their immune systems had to be in a perpetual arms race just to survive. The murmurs in the chamber grew more uneasy. "But the most shocking part," Zeital continued, "is not that humans survive on this world. It is that they thrive." A new projection appeared. Human civilization. Massive cities built in regions others would deem uninhabitable. Settlements on mountaintops, where oxygen levels were dangerously low. Towns in deserts, where water was nearly non-existent. Villages in frozen wastelands where temperatures would kill most species in hours. The Drachnid ambassador clicked his mandibles, his previous certainty now shaken. "These creatures live in such conditions by choice?" he asked, his voice laced with disbelief. "Not only that," Zeital replied, "but they have also developed technologies that allow them to conquer these environments." He waved his hand, and the projection changed again, this time showing humans in space. Unlike Drachnids, whose physiology is naturally suited for survival, humans should be fragile, weak. Yet they have achieved space travel, not because of natural adaptations, but because of their sheer ingenuity. They were not born to survive the void, but they adapted. The chamber was silent now. Even the quantum thinkers, whose minds constantly processed data in the background, had halted their computations. But Zeital wasn't finished. He had saved the most disturbing revelation for last. "You see, honored colleagues, Earth is not just a planet of survivors. It is a planet of apex predators." The projection flickered again, now showing footage of human hunting techniques. Primitive tribesmen, armed only with wooden spears, taking down creatures many times their size through sheer coordination. Marathon hunters who chased prey across vast distances, exhausting them before moving in for the kill. Modern snipers eliminating targets from unimaginable distances with terrifying precision. "Unlike other species that evolved to flee from predators," Zeital said, "humans evolved to hunt. They are not prey. They are not merely survivors. They are something else entirely." The Drachnid ambassador's mandibles twitched. "This is absurd," he said, though his voice lacked the previous confidence. "Even if what you say is true, surely these creatures must have limits. There must be weaknesses." Zytal nodded. "Yes, they do. But unlike other species, they do not accept their weaknesses as permanent." Another projection appeared. Human innovation. They could not fly, so they built machines that could. They could not breathe underwater, so they created pressurized diving suits. Their bodies were vulnerable, so they engineered armor, weapons, and medicine to compensate. When faced with an enemy they could not defeat, they created alliances, devised strategies, and adapted faster than any species in history. For every obstacle their world threw at them, humans found a solution, Zytal concluded. And that is why they are the most dangerous species we have ever encountered. Not because they are the strongest, or the fastest, or the most resilient, but because they are the most adaptable. The silence in the chamber was now absolute. Even the Drachnid ambassador, once so certain of his species' dominance, sat in contemplative silence. It was then that first speaker Lumen spoke again, her voice quiet but firm. "You are suggesting, Chief Xenobiologist, that humans are not merely survivors of a death world. You are saying that they are something more." Zytal exhaled slowly. "Yes," he said. "We have spent centuries believing that the Drachnids were the ultimate test of survival, that no species could surpass them." He paused, letting the weight of his next words settle. "But humans have proven us wrong. They do not just survive in death worlds. They conquer them." And for the first time in galactic history, the assembled species realized they had underestimated humanity, terribly. The first encounter. The vast emptiness of space stretched endlessly in all directions, punctuated only by the distant glow of dying stars and swirling cosmic radiation storms. The Star Seeker, an advanced research vessel of the Galactic Exploration Corps, drifted silently near a gas giant, scanning the system for anomalies. It was supposed to be a routine mission, and then the sensors picked up something impossible. "Unidentified vessel detected at 3 light-minutes distance." Chief Science Officer Ralnick stiffened at the report. His crystalline eyes flickered as he analyzed the data stream pouring into his console. "Impossible," he muttered. "No species would willingly enter this region without maximum radiation shielding." This sector of space was notorious. The radiation levels alone could strip organic tissue down to molecular fragments in minutes. The only species reckless enough to travel here were the Drachnids, and even they did so in heavily shielded warships. Yet as the unknown ship drew closer, its structure became clearer. It was small, it was primitive, and it was barely shielded. Captain Vera, an experienced explorer with more than a century of interstellar diplomacy under his belt, observed the readings with growing unease. "Are we certain this isn't a derelict?" he asked. "No functioning vessel would dare enter this region so underprotected." Navigator Prell shook her head. "Scans show active life signs, Captain. Multiple biological entities aboard." The bridge crew exchanged wary glances. A ship that size in a sector this hostile, with such minimal shielding? It was suicide, and yet it was moving toward them. Then the unthinkable happened. A communication request pinged their systems. "First contact." The bridge fell silent. For a moment, nobody moved. No one spoke. Then Captain Vieira gave the order. "Open the channel." The hollow screen flickered to life, and for the first time in galactic history, the crew of the Star Seeker laid eyes on a human. He was soft. No armored plating, no reinforced exoskeleton, no redundant organs or natural weaponry, just pink flesh wrapped in a simple fabric uniform. And yet, despite his obvious fragility, he looked calm, relaxed, as if he were completely unaware of the death that surrounded him. "This is Captain Alexander Reeves of the Earth exploration vessel Horizon's Dream," the human said, his voice even, almost friendly. "We come in peace and seek friendly contact." Silence. The bridge crew of the Star Seeker stared, struggling to comprehend what they were seeing. Captain Vrea, recovering first, leaned forward. His voice was measured, carefully neutral. "Greetings, Captain Reeves. Your vessel appears to be in grave danger." Our sensors indicate the local radiation levels exceed safe parameters for organic life by several orders of magnitude. We stand ready to assist in emergency evacuation. He expected panic. He expected the human to acknowledge their imminent doom, to request immediate rescue. Instead, Reeves laughed. Ah, that. Yeah, we noticed. It's about equivalent to what we deal with on long-haul flights back home. Nothing our bodies can't handle. Nothing they couldn't handle? Ralnick nearly collapsed from shock. The crew scrambled to recheck their readings. Surely their instruments were malfunctioning. Surely these creatures weren't standing in a ship with barely adequate shielding, bathed in lethal radiation, and calling it normal. But the readings were correct. These humans should have been dead the moment they entered this region. And yet here they were, unbothered. A fatal meeting. Before they could protest, before they could warn these impossibly resilient creatures of their impending doom, the humans began docking procedures. Stop them, Ralnick hissed. If they board without decontamination, they'll be vaporized within minutes. Captain Vray slammed the emergency lockdown, but it was too late. The docking bay doors hissed open, and then the impossible happened again. 5 humans stepped into the airlock. No environmental suits, no radiation shielding, not even simple respirators, just plain uniforms, backpacks, and confident smiles. One of them, a dark-haired woman holding a primitive tablet, glanced around, then frowned slightly. Huh, she mused, tapping something onto her device. Your artificial gravity seems a bit off. Might want to check your calibration. Ralnick stared. These humans should have been dead. Every biological scan screamed that they were standing in an environment that should kill them in minutes. And yet, they looked fine. Not just alive, but comfortable. Captain, Ralnick whispered, unable to tear his eyes away from the scene. This is not possible. Dr. Samira Patel, the scientist among them, smiled politely and extended a hand toward him. Dr. Patel, xenobiologist. I have to say, your ship's design is fascinating. Would love to compare notes on life support efficiency if you're interested. Ralnick felt his world collapsing around him. Redefining the impossible. The humans were led to the council chamber, where the Starseeker scientists frantically ran tests. Anything to understand how these seemingly fragile beings were immune to death itself. They took radiation readings. The humans registered dangerously high exposure levels. They checked biological degradation, no cellular damage. They analyzed metabolic rates, completely normal. How? Zeital asked in disbelief. How are you still functioning? Dr. Patel chuckled, clearly amused by the reaction. Oh, we have a few genetic tricks up our sleeves. Built-in DNA repair mechanisms, enhanced immune responses. Nothing too fancy. Nothing too fancy? These creatures had rewritten the very definition of survival, and they called it nothing too fancy? You should be dying, one of the researchers blurted out. Captain Reeves grinned. Yeah, we get that a lot. A new reality. As the crew of the Starseeker continued to process this reality-shattering discovery, Zeital made one final note in his research logs. We once believed that the Drachnids were the galaxy's most extreme survivors, that no species could surpass them in terms of resilience and endurance. We were wrong. Humans are not just survivors of a death world, they redefine what it means to endure. They do not fear death. They do not just adapt. They thrive. And for the first time in galactic history, the Galactic Council knew fear. The Galactic Summit, a meeting unlike any other. The Interstellar Summit was an event unlike any other in recorded galactic history, held aboard Space Station Zenith, a neutral meeting ground orbiting a binary star system. It had been designed to accommodate the environmental needs of dozens of species. Each delegation had their own carefully calibrated atmospheric chambers, some filled with methane, others nitrogen-rich vapors, or highly pressurized liquid mediums. The station itself was a marvel, ensuring that no single species had an advantage over another in interstellar diplomacy. Yet as the humans arrived, it became immediately clear that all precautions had been entirely unnecessary. Arrival of the humans. 2 solar cycles before the summit's official start, The human delegation arrived early, a rarity among diplomatic meetings. Their ship, Horizon's Dream, docked smoothly without the extensive decontamination procedures that were standard protocol for new species. The station's safety officers panicked. Supreme Security Officer Ral Nick, still recovering from his first shocking encounter with humans, nearly suffered neural shutdown when the humans stepped off their ship without any protective gear. The docking bay had been carefully prepared. Atmospheric scrubbers, meant to filter out toxic compounds humans supposedly wouldn't tolerate. Radiation shielding, intended to protect their fragile bodies from deep space exposure. Pressurized chambers, calibrated to sustain them under what the Council assumed were their safe limits. And yet, as Captain Alexander Reeves and his team casually walked into the station, nothing happened. No gasping for breath, no signs of distress, no collapses due to gravitational shifts, nothing. Dr. Samira Patel, the lead human scientist, pulled out her ever-present tablet and made a quick note. Atmospheric composition is well within tolerable ranges, a bit drier than Earth standards, but breathable. Gravity's a little low, feels like we're walking on the moon. Ralnick twitched. Walking on the moon? No species had ever described low gravity as a mild inconvenience before. First speaker Lu Min floated forward in her gravity bubble, tendrils shifting colors in a pattern that indicated profound disbelief. "Honored guests," she began, voice carefully neutral. "We prepared extensive safety measures for your arrival. Yet it seems you do not require them?" Captain Reeves smiled, a human expression that some species found strangely unsettling. Too many exposed teeth. "We appreciate the thought," he said, "but it turns out most of the adjustments aren't really necessary. We're pretty adaptable." The word adaptable echoed through the chamber like a cosmic revelation. Breaking the rules of biology. The official summit convened in the main council chamber, an enormous space designed to accommodate over 100 different species. Every delegation had expected the humans to remain in their specialized habitat chambers. After all, no single environment could be safe for every species present. The room was a patchwork of controlled climate zones, each carefully separated to prevent cross-contamination. The humans? They walked straight in. No pressure suits, no oxygen tanks, no biosealed helmets. They simply took their seats, right in the central gathering zone, where the atmospheric conditions fluctuated between different species requirements. The entire council stared. Dr. Patel, flipping through her notes, glanced around. "Oh," she said, "I take it no one else does this." A few species twitched in response. "No one else can do this," said the Drachnid ambassador, his mandibles clicking in disbelief. "Do you even realize the environmental chaos in this chamber? The oxygen levels fluctuate between toxic and non-breathable every few meters. The gravity shifts across sections. There are radiation pockets. Any normal being would be suffering severe biological distress." Captain Reeves leaned back in his seat, hands behind his head. "Yeah, it's not too bad," he said. "We're used to weird conditions back home. Kind of a running theme for our species." There was a moment of silence as the entire Galactic Council processed this information. Supreme Commander Vexar of the Drachnid fleet finally spoke. "You mean to say," he said slowly, "that you are simply comfortable in any environment?" Dr. Patel grinned. "Well, not any environment," she admitted, "but we tend to push limits. We've got settlements in the Arctic, the Sahara, the depths of the ocean, and even in the vacuum of space. If we can't survive somewhere naturally, we just figure out a way to make it work." The council chamber erupted into whispers and quiet discussions. A quantum thinker whose species had spent millennia refining mathematical models on biological adaptation finally spoke. "That is not how evolution works," it said, its many eyes blinking asynchronously. "A species does not simply decide to survive in impossible conditions. We don't decide," Captain Reeves corrected. "We just refuse to accept that we can't." A demonstration of human resilience. It wasn't long before an unplanned demonstration of human resilience took place. During the second day of the summit, a maintenance drone malfunctioned, crashing into one of the chamber's atmospheric stabilizers. The result? a catastrophic decompression event. The pressure in one section of the room collapsed, the temperature plummeted, and several alien delegates were immediately incapacitated by the sudden atmospheric shift. Panic spread. Security systems failed to engage in time. Emergency protocols weren't fast enough. The first species to react? The humans. Before the automated response systems even activated, the human delegation was already moving. Captain Reeves and Lieutenant Parker sprinted toward the exposed section, scooping up weakened diplomats and carrying them to safety. Dr. Patel and her team pulled emergency repair kits from their bags, sealing the breach manually before the station systems could even process the failure. Human engineers bypassed the damaged stabilizers, restoring atmospheric balance in seconds, while other species were still trying to comprehend what had happened. When the chaos settled, the council was left staring in awe. "You saved them," First Speaker Lumen whispered, "without any protective equipment, in conditions that should have been instantly fatal." Captain Reeves, adjusting his uniform, shrugged. "We've handled worse." The Drachnid ambassador, silent until now, finally spoke with quiet acceptance. "I once believed the Drachnids were the greatest survivors in the galaxy," he admitted, "but now I see we were never truly tested." A shift in galactic perception. By the end of the summit, one thing had become abundantly clear. Humans did not just survive extreme conditions. They embraced them. They thrived in them. The Galactic Council had spent centuries classifying species by their ability to endure hardship. The Drachnids had been the standard for survival. But now they had to reconsider everything, because humans weren't just survivors. They were something far more dangerous. They were unstoppable. The emergency incident. The Galactic Summit had been going smoothly after the initial shock of humanity's adaptability. While many species still struggled to fully grasp how humans operated, they had begun to accept that this strange, fragile-looking species was anything but weak. But then, the accident happened. The catastrophe unfolds. It started as a minor systems failure. A maintenance drone, assigned to oversee structural stability in the conference chamber, suffered a malfunction in its navigational array. Instead of recalibrating itself, it veered off course, slamming into one of the structural supports of the station's environmental stabilizers. At first, the damage seemed minimal, just a few sparks, a flickering of emergency lights. Then the support beam fractured. A loud groaning sound echoed through the chamber as the atmospheric integrity weakened. Then a section of the wall exploded outward. Immediate chaos. The decompression was instantaneous. Several delegates were pulled toward the breach, their bodies unable to withstand the sudden loss of pressure. The temperature plummeted, sending several cold-sensitive species into immediate metabolic shock. Some delegates, whose physiology depended on specific atmospheric compositions, began suffocating as their carefully regulated environments collapsed around them. Panic set in. Screams filled the chamber as representatives desperately tried to flee. Security systems were too slow to react. Automated stabilizers were failing. In that moment, with countless lives at risk, the humans moved first. Humans in action. Captain Alexander Reeves didn't hesitate. "Lieutenant Parker, Dr. Patel, we need immediate containment." Without waiting for an automated response, the humans sprang into action. 1. Rescue under pressure. Reeves and Parker sprinted toward the affected area, grabbing 2 delegates who were being pulled toward the breach. One of them was a Nebulan Mistwalker, a being composed mostly of gas. Their fragile form was dissipating in the decompression. Parker yanked a portable containment field from his belt and sealed the Nebulan within it just in time. Reeves grabbed a Drachnid diplomat, dragging him back despite the difference in mass. Even for a well-built human, Drachnids were monstrously heavy, but somehow Reeves managed. 2. Sealing the breach. While most species froze in fear, Dr. Samira Patel was already working. She rushed toward a console, overriding the failing station security systems. Pulling out a toolkit from her uniform, she bypassed station protocols and rerouted emergency power to activate the blast doors. When the system refused to engage due to an automatic lockdown sequence, she manually overrode the failsafe using an improvised command sequence. Within seconds, emergency bulkheads slammed shut, sealing off the breach before it could widen further. but not before two more delegates were nearly lost. 3. A daring save. As the doors began closing, one of the Seraphon delegates, a winged species adapted to high-altitude environments, lost their grip on a rail and was sucked toward the breach. Without thinking, Reeves lunged forward, grabbing the Seraphon's outstretched hand at the last possible moment. For a second, the two were dangling in the air, just inches from the void of space. With a grunt of effort, Reeves pulled the Seraphon back into the chamber, rolling onto the floor as the blast doors sealed shut behind them. And just like that, the crisis was over. Stunned silence. For several long moments, no one spoke. The chamber was a mess. Some delegates were still recovering from oxygen deprivation. Others were staring at the humans in shock. The security teams, who had arrived too late to be of any help, stood frozen in place, realizing that the crisis had already been handled. The humans had saved them, without protective gear, without hesitation. First speaker Lu Min, her tendrils still flickering in patterns of disbelief, finally spoke. You saved them, without equipment, without protocols. Reeves, still catching his breath, shrugged. Well, yeah. What else were we supposed to do? A new perspective on humanity. The Galactic Council had always viewed survival through the lens of endurance. The Drachnids were considered the strongest because of their unbreakable armor and redundant organs. Other species prided themselves on advanced technology, evasive tactics, or sheer biological resilience. But this was something else entirely. It wasn't just that humans could survive extreme conditions. It was that they actively risked their lives to save others, even when they didn't have to. Supreme Commander Vexar of the Drachnid Empire, previously skeptical of humanity, now stared at Reeves in silence. After a long pause, he finally spoke. Your species does not fear death, does it? Reeves wiped sweat from his brow. We don't like it, he admitted, but we don't run from it either. Dr. Patel crossed her arms. Back on Earth, we have a saying, leave no one behind. The words hung in the air, sinking into the minds of every species present. For the first time, the Galactic Council understood what made humans different. They weren't just survivors. They weren't just adaptable. They were protectors. And that, more than anything, made them the most dangerous species in the galaxy. Not because they were the strongest, not because they were the most technologically advanced, but because they refused to let others die, even at great personal risk. And in a galaxy where every species prioritized its own survival above all else, that made humanity truly unique. The war with the Drachnids, the Galactic Summit, had barely concluded when fear turned into action. For centuries, the Drachnids had stood unchallenged as the apex survivors of the galaxy. Their biology was near indestructible, their military unmatched, and their war tactics honed over millennia of conquest. But after witnessing the humans' resilience and adaptability, one Drachnid leader saw a threat unlike any other. That leader was Supreme Commander Vexar, the highest-ranking warlord of the Drachnid Empire. And in his mind, there was only one course of action: exterminate the humans before they could rise any further. The invasion of New Terra. The Drachnids struck first. They launched a full-scale invasion on New Terra, humanity's largest colony outside the Sol system. Their third fleet, an armada of over 400 warships, descended upon the planet. Vexar had planned this attack meticulously. There were no military installations, no planetary shields, no visible defenses. The colony was primarily agricultural and industrial, a soft target. It should have been an easy victory. It wasn't, because the humans had planned for this. The Drachnid perspective. As Vexar's warships entered orbit, his second-in-command, Commander Zoltek, monitored the battlefield. Supreme Commander, our scans show no significant planetary defenses. There are no warships stationed in the system. Vexar nodded in satisfaction. Then this will be over quickly, he said. Prepare for planetary bombardment. Zoltek hesitated. Sir, there's something odd about the planetary scans. The radiation levels are fluctuating. Some of our comms are being disrupted. Vexar dismissed it. Likely just natural interference. Proceed with the attack. And then everything went wrong. The trap is sprung. The moment the Drachnid ships crossed into low orbit, their systems failed. Communications collapsed. Targeting systems glitched. Shields fluctuated. "What is happening?" Vexar roared. Then the surface of New Terra erupted in blinding energy. What the Drachnids had mistaken for agricultural infrastructure had never been farms at all. They were disguised planetary defense weapons. New Terra's geothermal plants doubled as massive plasma artillery batteries. Its atmospheric processors, secretly capable of generating targeted electromagnetic pulses, EMPs, its communication towers, repurposed as directed energy weapons, frying Drachnid ship sensors instantly. Within seconds, the invaders were blind, deaf, and vulnerable, and that was when the humans counterattacked. The human counteroffensive. As the Drachnid fleet struggled to recalibrate, something even more horrifying happened. The human civilians, the very colonists the Drachnids had assumed to be defenseless farmers and workers, armed themselves. From underground bunkers, human troops emerged, not in traditional military formations, but in small mobile strike teams. Commander Zoltek watched in disbelief as what appeared to be simple laborers, miners, engineers, scientists, picked up weapons and fought back. "This is impossible," Zoltek cried. "They should be panicking. Why are they fighting like trained soldiers?" Captain Reeves, watching from the command center, grinned as he listened in on Drachnid comms. "Because, buddy," he said to himself, "on Earth we don't have civilians. We have reservists. Drachnid defeat." By the time the Drachnid fleet managed to restore partial control, the battle was already lost. Their warships were crippled before they could fire a single shot. Their troops were overwhelmed by human forces who fought with tactics that the Drachnids had never encountered. Their command structure collapsed as their officers were taken out by human special forces disguised as civilians. Supreme Commander Vexar, realizing his terrible mistake, ordered a retreat, but it was too late. The humans let them go, but not before planting a final message into their failing communication systems. A simple, terrifying statement: "If you come again, we won't hold back next time." The aftermath: a galaxy changed forever. The news of the battle spread faster than light. The unthinkable had happened. The unstoppable Drachnid Empire had been defeated, not by an established military force, but by a colony of humans posing as farmers. The Galactic Council reconvened in an emergency session. Supreme Commander Vexar, once feared, now humbled, stood before the council. "For 3,000 cycles, the Drachnids have believed we were the pinnacle of survival," he admitted, his voice low. "We were wrong." He turned to the human delegation, where Captain Reeves and Dr. Patel sat. "You could have wiped us out," Vexar said. "Why didn't you?" Reeves folded his arms. "Because that's not what we do," he replied. "We don't conquer. We don't exterminate. We only fight when we have no other choice." Vexar studied him for a long moment, then spoke words that no Drachnid had ever spoken to another species. "Then perhaps so we have something to learn from you." A ripple of shock spread through the council. The Drachnids, who had once seen humans as a threat, now saw them as something greater. Not just a rival species, but an ally worth having. The final revelation. As the council debated the future of human-Drachnid relations, Dr. Patel presented one final discovery. "We've analyzed the physiological data of Drachnids and humans," she said, "and we found something interesting." A hologram appeared, two genetic structures side by side. One was Drachnid, one was human. They were different, but not as different as everyone had assumed. Drachnids and humans evolved under similar pressures, Dr. Patel explained. Extreme environments, constant danger, high mortality rates. The result? We both became survivors. The difference is how we approach survival. She turned to Vexar. "You adapted by evolving defenses, armor, weapons, biological redundancy. You fight to dominate." She gestured toward herself and Reeves. "We adapted by evolving our minds. We create technology, strategy, and cooperation. We fight to protect." A moment of silence passed. Then Vexar did something unprecedented. He extended one of his massive arms toward Reeves, a Drachnid gesture of respect and alliance. Reeves, smiling, shook it. In that moment, the galaxy changed forever. What had begun as a war had turned into the greatest alliance the galaxy had ever seen. Because humans were not just another species of survivors. They were the future of survival itself. The dawn of a new era. The war between humans and Drachnids had ended, but the impact of that battle echoed across the galaxy. For the first time in known history, the Drachnid Empire had suffered defeat, not at the hands of overwhelming firepower, nor through brute strength, but through adaptability, strategy, and cooperation. And in that defeat, Supreme Commander Vexar and his people had learned something invaluable. Strength alone was not enough to survive the universe. The unlikely alliance. The Galactic Council had expected a long and uneasy truce between humans and Drachnids. Instead, something unthinkable happened. They became allies. It started small. Drachnid scientists, once dismissive of other species, began studying human technology. Human armor designs were incorporated into Drachnid exosuits, making them lighter and more energy efficient. Drachnid bioregenerative medicine was enhanced using human gene therapy techniques, reducing recovery time from injuries by half. Human tactical simulations reshaped the way Drachnid military forces trained, emphasizing flexibility over brute force. But the biggest breakthrough came in the field of planetary engineering. Dr. Samira Patel, leading a joint human Drachnid research team, stood before the Galactic Council and presented a stunning proposal. For centuries, Drachnid technology has revolved around surviving hostile environments, she said. Meanwhile, humanity has focused on terraforming, turning hostile worlds into livable ones. A holographic projection appeared. It showed Drar, the Drachnid homeworld, a nightmarish landscape of acid storms and unrelenting gravity. Then it shifted to show Earth, a planet once equally deadly in its infancy, yet now teeming with diverse ecosystems. What if, Dr. Patel continued, instead of surviving Drar, we change it? Gas rippled through the chamber. Terraforming Drar? That was impossible. The planet was too unstable, too hostile. But the humans didn't believe in impossible. They began the project anyway. Transforming a death world for thousands of years, Drachnids had believed Drar could never be altered. It was a planet of death, a crucible where only the strongest could survive. Humans, they saw an opportunity. Using a combination of Drachnid resilience and human ingenuity, the two species began altering the planet itself. Geothermal stabilization. Human engineers using deep core drilling techniques found ways to regulate Drar's violent tectonic shifts. Atmospheric manipulation. Drachnid scientists, guided by human climate modeling, designed ways to filter out corrosive gases and introduce stable oxygen pockets. Hybrid agriculture. Using genetic engineering, humans and Drachnids created the first ever Drachnid-adapted crops, allowing for sustainable food production rather than constant hunting. The first habitable zones on Drar were created within 15 years. For the first time, Drachnids could walk outside without protective exosuits. For the first time, they could breathe unfiltered air. And for the first time, they realized they didn't just have to survive. They could live. A galaxy changed forever. The success of the Drar terraforming initiative sent shockwaves through the interstellar community. Suddenly, species that had spent millennia struggling to adapt to hostile conditions turned to humans for help. The Mistwalkers of Nebula Prime, who had always relied on artificial enclosures, worked with humans to engineer stable atmospheric fields, allowing them to expand their civilization for the first time. The silicon-based rock shapers of the Outer Rim, who could only thrive on a handful of high-pressure worlds, collaborated with human miners to develop gravity adjustment technologies, making countless new planets viable for habitation. The Seraphon, a winged species from a high-altitude gas giant, learned how to construct floating habitats based on human orbital station designs. Within a century, the entire galactic balance of power had shifted. The true power of humanity wasn't just in their ability to survive, it was in their ability to help others do the same. The legacy of cooperation, Supreme Commander Vexar, once humanity's greatest enemy, now stood before the Galactic Council as an advocate for cooperation. For too long, we Drachnids have believed that survival meant domination, he said, that we had to be the strongest, the most ruthless to endure. He turned to Captain Alexander Reeves, standing beside him. But the humans have shown us another path, one that does not rely on fear, but on trust, one that does not demand submission, but growth. The chamber stood in silent awe. No one had ever imagined that Drachnids would advocate for unity, and yet here they were. And so the greatest war in modern history had become the foundation of the greatest alliance ever forged. An alliance not built on fear, but on hope. And from that moment forward, the galaxy was never the same again. The lesson learned a century had passed since the war with the Drachnids and the formation of the Galactic Cooperation Initiative. What had once been a fragile truce had grown into something much greater, a new era of unity and shared knowledge. Humanity, the species once feared as unpredictable and reckless, had fundamentally changed the course of galactic history, and the lesson they taught the stars was simple. Survival is not enough. Adaptation is the key. The evolution of understanding. At the heart of the Galactic Research Council, Chief Xenobiologist Saital, now an elder among his kind, stood before a new generation of scientists. When I first presented my findings on humans, he began, we believed they were nothing more than another Deathworld species, an anomaly, a curiosity. He gestured toward the massive holographic display behind him. It no longer showed humans as a dangerous unknown. Instead, it depicted the vast advancements they had brought to the galaxy, terraforming once uninhabitable worlds, developing new medical treatments for countless species, creating interstellar conflict resolution strategies that prevented wars before they began. We assumed their greatest strength was their physical endurance, their biology, their ability to survive the impossible, Saital continued. But we were wrong. He turned, his many eyes scanning the audience. Their greatest strength is their mind. The room remained silent as he spoke his final words. They do not simply endure their environment. They change it. They do not wait for evolution to guide them. They force it to happen. When faced with a challenge, they do not submit. They solve it. And when they find a way to survive, he paused, letting the words settle, they share it with others. The Deathworlder paradox. At a diplomatic summit, Supreme Commander Vexar, once humanity's enemy, now its strongest ally, addressed the gathered leaders of the galaxy. For centuries, the Drachnid Empire believed that might was the only path to survival, he said, that we had to conquer, to dominate, to destroy before we ourselves were destroyed. He looked at Captain Alexander Reeves, now an admiral, standing beside him. But humans, they do not conquer. They do not rule through fear. And yet they have reshaped the galaxy more than any war ever has. The council members nodded in silent agreement. We called them Deathworlders because we thought their home was unlivable, Vexar continued. But it was not Earth that made them strong. It was their refusal to accept limitations. He gestured to the Drar Terraforming Initiative, now a thriving ecosystem. A world once considered a death sentence, now a place of life. Because of them, my people no longer fight for survival. We live. And because of them, we now understand a truth we once ignored. He turned to face the council directly. A true Deathworlder is not the one who is strongest. A true Deathworlder is the one who refuses to stop improving. A future without limits. Dr. Samira Patel, now a revered scientist, led a group of young researchers through a human Drachnid science facility. The reason humanity has thrived is because we never accepted the limits nature placed on us, she explained. We couldn't fly, so we built machines. We couldn't breathe underwater, so we created diving suits. We couldn't survive in space, so we engineered ships to carry us beyond the stars. One of the Drachnid students hesitated. But what if you do reach a limit? What if there's something even humans can't overcome? Dr. Patel smiled. Then we'll find a way around it. The students nodded, understanding something profound. The lesson was never about who was strongest, fastest, or most durable. It was about who could adapt, who could innovate, and who could uplift those around them. And humanity had proven, beyond any doubt, that they were the best in the galaxy at doing exactly that. Final words. As the galaxy moved forward, a common phrase began spreading among the stars, one inspired by humanity's impact. Whenever a problem seemed impossible to solve, Whenever a species faced an obstacle they thought they could never overcome, a new saying emerged: find a human. They'll figure it out. And for the first time in history, the galaxy wasn't just surviving, it was thriving.